Technology has been pivotal in driving structural change. In the agricultural revolution, stable food production created an environment where a person could literally spend an entire lifetime within a 25-mile radius of their birthplace. The Industrial Revolution brought about an era that enabled rapid movement of goods, supplies, and people, which fundamentally changed the way the economy evolved. The pace of commerce quickened, and the world became significantly smaller through ships, trains, and planes. Today, in the same way that the Industrial Revolution made the physical world smaller, the information revolution has fundamentally transformed society. The world is smaller and more connected, and information can be shared across the globe in a matter of seconds in ways that were structurally impossible. New relationships and networks can form spontaneously. The federal government is also going through stages of transformation as it enters the digital world. First, federal agencies place information online without changing the underlying business processes. Essentially, they webified the federal government. In the second phase, the focus shifted to the automation of back-end processes and improvement of citizen services and how citizens can access those services. However, we have yet to turn these concepts into reality. The next phase, advancing America into the 21st century and realizing the promise of Government 2.0, entails a fundamental shift in the interaction between American people and their government. It requires a context-driven government. President Obama has made it clear that we must use technology to reform government and to improve the exchange of information between the federal government and its citizens. Context-driven government means that government information and services are provided to citizens when and where they're needed as they go about their daily digital lives. For example, a teacher checks her smartphone before heading out for the day. An alert flashes, and she realizes it's Earth Day, so she decides to walk. On a site that's fed by NOAA data, she notices that it may rain and decides to take an umbrella. Using an online map, she finds the closest coffee shop on her way to work. She pays her mortgage online while she waits and connects to her social networking site to make her evening plans. This takes place in minutes, yet she has traversed multiple organizations and multiple digital destinations. The information and services are simply available where needed and when needed.
I just thought that was a great example. That was a great example.
We must use context-driven government to bring government to its citizens. Access to government services should just be another component in a seamless digital experience. Doing so not only provides better service to our citizens, but also allows the government to leverage existing platforms, therefore lowering the cost of government operations. As the President has stated, information maintained by the federal government is a national asset and should be made available to the public in a way that's easy to find and ensure that we protect the privacy and the security of the data that's being leveraged. Making the information and the operations of government more open and accessible will drive accountability, enhance performance, and also ensure that the American people are engaged. Structural change is never easy and will require a strong focus on IT governance, from capital planning and investment management to privacy and security. On March 26th, the President hosted an online town hall, the first of its kind for any White House. And with almost 100,000 participants and over 3.5 million votes cast, it was an unprecedented experience in public participation. We must and will continue to engage the American people through such platforms. Through the use of social networking tools, increased transparency of government data, and a strong focus and collaboration, we can harness the power of innovation across the government and realize the promise of Government 2.0. This is my testimony, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Good. Thank you very much for an excellent statement. Just one question. I didn't think about asking this one before, but the President's online town hall meeting, 100,000 participants and over 3.5 million votes cast. Just take a minute. I didn't participate. I was not among the 100,000. But talk to me about the 3.5 million votes cast. Were those cast by the participants, and how they just did it over the internet? How did it work?
Actually, over the internet, after the questions were written, so a lot of people participated by posing questions. And other people, the 3.5 million plus votes, actually decided to vote on the questions that were already put in place and voted up or down based on the questions they thought reflected what they wanted to know from the president.
All right. I have some questions of my own, and I'd like to ask those now. On the campaign trail, there's a lot of discussion, as I'm sure you'll recall, of using technology to make government more efficient, more transparent, and more secure. In fact, when I was on the campaign trail as governor, I remember talking about that a long time ago, and again as a candidate for the U.S. Senate. Some of these ideas can be seen in the newrecovery.gov website that was recently set up, and will be tracking stimulus funds down to the local level. I also understand that you are behind the campaign using technologies like YouTube and Facebook to reach new voters. Is that true?
I didn't work on the campaign, but working with a new media team, we're making sure that we get as much information out to the people in the right context.
All right. What are some of your top priorities that you have for using technology in government?
Sure. So part of it is recognizing that, let's take Facebook, for example. There are 200 million users on Facebook, out of which 56 million of those users are in the United States. Yet the federal government continues to make investments in new platforms when we could be leveraging some of the platforms that exist out there. So the real question for us is to figure out, as technology has evolved, there are a set of platforms that already exist. How can we ensure, for example, as we advertise jobs, how do we make them available on platforms that the American people are already using? Second is, from a priority perspective, is to look at the $71 billion that's already spent today on information technology and back-end systems. How do we rationalize those investments and ensure that, as you mentioned earlier, that those investments actually produce the dividends we're looking for, that those projects come on time, on budget, and if they don't, that we're willing to make the tough choices around either stopping those projects or moving capital to where it's most effective. Mm-hmm. Another area is around democratizing data. And what we mean by that is, take, for example, the Human Genome Project at the National Institutes of Health. When the NIH, working with other world bodies, decided to put all that data and that information in the public domain, what it did is it spawned a revolution around personalized medicine. And you ended up with a pipeline of new drugs that were never imagined before for approval in the FDA. Same thing with GPS. The federal government has a lot of data, such as the satellites that were released by the military when it came to GPS information. What that did, by releasing that information, it spawned a whole new industry to where you could literally look on a map and find out where the closest coffee shop is, or directions from one city to another. So in essence, making sure that we're doing a better job when it comes to the dollars we're spending, the $71 billion in capital. Second, making sure that we're engaging the American people by leveraging some of these new technologies. And third, ensuring that we create a much more transparent and open government so that the American people know exactly what's going on in terms of their government. All right.
When you look ahead for the balance of this year, and the 3 years that follow, what would be among your top priorities for, we'll say, for this year, and for the 3 years that follow it?
So two key areas that we must focus on. One is around IT investments. Second is around cybersecurity. As you mentioned earlier, around cybersecurity, we need to ensure that the information that exists in our current, whether it's our databases or applications, and the processes that exist today that have helped move the federal government to the digital world are also safeguarded, and that we've taken the proper precautions to ensure the security of those systems. So that's vital. A big part of what we'll be doing is looking at how do we ensure a more secure environment when it comes to computing, And second, how do we ensure that we have a rational approach to IT investment across the board?
Okay. On the next panel, we have your predecessor, Ms. Karen Hughes, and I see her here today. Welcome. Nice to see you again. Under her leadership, OMB was able to get the ball rolling on some what I thought were some very good ideas. Let me just ask, how do you propose to build upon some of those successes, and are there areas where you plan to make improvements beyond those?
Sure. So one of the areas we're looking at is there are two sets of lists right now, the management watch list and the high risk list. So how do we take that to the next level, and how do we ensure that we're not just looking at lagging indicators, but leading indicators around problems when it comes to IT investments, or if projects begin to go in the wrong direction? How do we get ahead of some of those problems? So if we look at some of the reports that the GAO has issued around some of the recommendations of taking this to the next level, they're around how do you get that information faster, and secondly, from our perspective, how do we ensure that the frequency at which information is collected or data is collected is happening at a pace that allows us to change the trajectory of those projects? If you look at precision-guided missiles, for example, one of the reasons those missiles actually hit their target is because you get a constant feedback, a loop-back mechanism that lets you know how you're performing in relation to where you are. And what we need to do is increase the frequency and consolidate into one list some of those investments. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned some analysis just a moment ago, and let me just ask, when do you expect to provide the results of that analysis?
So we expect to have some of that analysis done in the next 2 months.
All right. When you were working down in Virginia with Governor Kane, were you his chief technology officer? What was your title? You were like part of technology and commerce.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was just sort of a logical coupling, but I'm sure it's not one that every state has. When in that experience that you had, what were some of the some of the challenges that you faced there, and the resolutions that you reached to those challenges that you think are transferable to the work that you'll be doing for our country? I used to say, as governor, we had in the National Governors Association, we had something called the Center for Best Practices, where everyone who had a good idea, whatever the issue might be, would submit it in, and then the rest of us could steal that idea and claim it as our own. But it was just a great way to identify best practices and find contact people in other states that could help us. But when you think of some of the things that you were working on in Virginia that you think might have relevance to what your new responsibilities are, what are some of those?
So some of them are actually around transparency and how transparency can drive results. So an example would be the governor came into office and with a biennium budget of $70 billion, what his policy objective was to ensure that small women and minority businesses were actually getting a portion of the capital, the set-aside that he had. Yet there was no mechanism in the cabinet to hold agency heads accountable for those results. And a lot of the information around that was based on self-reporting. So what we decided to do was we decided to move forward with an automated dashboard. And what this dashboard would do would essentially bypass any self-reporting and would go to what we call the golden source of data. So literally going to the credit card companies and figuring out how much money were agencies spending on credit cards, and going to the central procurement systems and looking at how much money was being spent. And from that dashboard, what we were able to do is once we got that data, we were able to display results based on agency head, the cabinet, how much money was spent on what businesses, and how they're performing. That allowed the governor to literally move the needle by over 30% in terms of his policy goals. In the same way,
the needle on the dashboard?
On the dashboard, by holding agency heads accountable, because he realized that by bringing agency heads to the office, he was able to say, well, how come these numbers are going the wrong way based on his policy guidance? In the same way, we believe that more information, transparency, and greater frequency. We did that on a monthly basis, so you could see every single month what was going on as far as the trajectory of those investments. So you could make shifts much faster rather than on an annual basis, which is what was happening before. That's one example. Another area that I think also applies to a broader economic principle.
And just go back to you first. Is that something you could see us doing in the federal government with this administration?
Absolutely. We believe that as we're looking at the IT investments, one of the areas we're exploring is how do we get as close to real-time data as possible, and how do we ensure that we can make as much of that information public and available to the American people, so that we have analysis that's happening, not just limited to OMB and the agencies, but the American people can hold the government accountable for the investments that are being made.
Okay. I understand another person was recently appointed as the federal government's first ever chief technology officer. And could you just take a minute or two and describe how you and the chief technology officer will interact together?
Sure. So the CIO role is based in the Office of Management and Budget and is focused primarily on the oversight of IT investments within the federal government. The CTO's role is based on the Office of Science and Technology Policy and is focused on advancing the President's agenda around broadband, health IT, research and development priorities for the country. The two of us will be working very, very closely together to advance the President's technology agenda.
And how will you go about doing that? How will you go about ensuring that happens?
So part of it is we also want to tap into the ingenuity of the American people. So with the CTO being able to convene the brightest minds in the private sector, in the NGO community, and bringing them together to work closely on some of these policy issues, and also to look at some of the technologies that are being incubated, whether it's in Silicon Valley or all over the country, and figuring out what is the leading technologies that can be leveraged within the federal government. And also looking at it from internally, from within the federal government, to see how do we spark innovation? How do we find the innovative path when it comes to these investments? A simple example is something that happened with TSA, where internally the CIO organization was moving forward on deploying potentially a blog solution that would have cost over $70,000. Yet one of the folks came there from the web managers group and said, well, we could do this for free. And they began to leverage a free platform rather than spending $70,000 of taxpayer money. Across the board, there are many, many examples, and what we need to make sure is we're engaging some of the innovative thinking that's happening outside the federal government, and at the same time ensuring that we're sparking that innovation within the federal government.
All right, thanks. As I'm sure you've experienced before as the chief technology officer in the district here, in the District of Columbia, there are a whole lot of problems that can then occur when deploying technology. This subcommittee is focused on IT investments that many times come in over budget, behind schedule, and underperforming. You've emphasized your interest in increasing transparency. You said it again here just a minute ago in IT investments, but we would like to hear about your specific plans for improving the oversight of these investments. For example, how will you provide more effective oversight for an IT investment? When should Congress expect to see some changes as a result of your efforts? And finally, do you believe that your office needs any additional resources or authority?
So specifically, one of the areas, if we step back and look at some of the big structural problems, why did these investments go the wrong way or fail in a lot of cases? One is we have very poor, in some cases, requirements from the federal government. So the federal government essentially doesn't do a good job defining what those requirements are. Second, we've got some runaway contracts that are in place.
Some runaway what?
Contracts. So what ends up happening is a contract is awarded that's not fixed price in some cases. And one of the reasons you do that is because you don't know what the requirements are up front. There are cases where you need cost plus contracts, but if we know what the requirements are up front, we should be able to award fixed price contracts. That's another area, and that's something we're looking at right now to figure out the proportion of contracts that are fixed price versus cost plus, and how those investments what types of results they yield.
What should be most common, fixed price or cost plus?
Fixed price should be most common if we know what the requirements are up front. We know what the scope is of the project. Some of the investments that go south, one of the reasons is because you end up with 400 plus change orders. So you begin with a project that's very simple, yet the scope keeps getting larger and larger and larger. And so what we need to ensure is we need to look at how do we move the agenda towards defining requirements clearly, holding the private sector also accountable when it comes to projects. And what I mean by that is once a contract has been awarded, scope has been created, needs have been defined, we need to ensure that the companies we've awarded these contracts to actually deliver on those results. And the way that happens is ensuring that there's a degree of engagement, a high degree of engagement from both the business side of the house and the technology side of the house. If you move in one direction or the other too much, what ends up happening is you end up usually having a failure in an IT project. You need a high level of engagement from the technology folks, and you need a high level of engagement from the business side. And the way we want to move forward in that direction is we want to be able to hold the CIOs accountable, working with agency heads, and providing as much information as possible. And that's what we're in the process of doing right now, is rationalizing some of those reports to figure out how do we get a greater degree of input from the agencies as these projects are moving forward. Because doing it on an annual basis is not going to be good enough. Because by the time you find out that the requirements have increased or the budget is out of control, it's too late to make any adjustments. And unfortunately, for far too long in some cases, we've thrown good money after bad money.
You may have answered this part of my question, but I missed it. And part of my question is a question about needing extra resources, additional authority. What did you say in response to that part of my question?
At this point, what we're doing is we're trying to see, whether if you look at the oversight function, we could move towards one direction, which would be infinite resources, or we're overseeing everything. But the reality is we can't afford faceless accountability. And what I mean by that is we need to be able to hold the CIOs accountable, who are responsible for being technology leaders within agencies. So we need to ensure that there are proper resources within the agencies on specific projects. From an OMB perspective, we've got the resources right now, and as we're rationalizing how the reports are going to work and what the frequency of that information is going to be in terms of collecting, I look forward to working with you to figure out what the appropriate solution is going to be in terms of the resources.
All right, fair enough. As you know, your predecessor, Karen Evans, was good enough to testify before us on several occasions on egregious IT systems that simply should never have been approved in the first place. However, for one reason or other, projects were still allowed to continue and to be funded. I understand that you have an extremely powerful weapon at your disposal to combat this problem. I understand that your position has the power of choosing to approve or not approve an agency's business cases. Are you willing to tell agencies no, especially if they don't plan the investment right the first time out?
Absolutely. And I think given the current economic climate we're in, especially now, we have to. We can't afford an environment where we would approve cases or business cases that are not well thought out, the requirements aren't defined. And also, we need to ensure that we hold those agencies accountable for the information that they're presenting to us and the whole ecosystem. And the reason where you get into a lot of complexity here is because you've got an ecosystem of the project managers, the CIOs, the agency heads, the vendors, and accountability has to happen at every step of the way. And we need to focus a lot more on leading indicators rather than just lagging indicators. And the more information we can get and the more frequently we can get information on the health of some of these initiatives, the quicker we can make some of those decisions.
Mm-hmm. There's an old saying that if you fail to plan, then you should plan to fail. I believe that there's a lot of truth to that saying, especially in government, state government, local government, or federal government. Further, when the executive branch provides Congress detailed plans, we're better able to hold agencies accountable. Will your office be producing any strategic plans on how you expect to achieve your priorities? And second, will you provide these plans to Congress so we can keep track of your successes?
Yes, we're actually working on that as we speak. As far as one, the agenda; number two, rationalizing the reports that we've talked about; number three, in terms of what we're doing as far as our transparency initiatives and what results we hope to produce as a function of those transparency initiatives, and also in terms of the path forward, making sure that from an accountability perspective, how do we measure success from an OMB perspective? And I look forward to working with the new Chief Performance Officer as we set out, the agenda around technology and innovation across the federal government, and also the new Chief Technology Officer.
All right. After a subcommittee hearing, I think it was last year, maybe July, August, somewhere in that range, OMB developed a website that provided information on all information technology investments in the federal government. I'd like to believe that they took that step because we kept pressuring them or encouraging them to give us more information. However, I don't believe that the website gives us the information that we need. For instance, there's relatively little information on whether IT projects are millions of dollars over budget or months behind schedule or ahead of schedule, for that matter. Let me just ask, will you commit to providing Congress with information of this nature?
Yes, Senator, and we plan to actually add more information on that website.
Can you give us some idea of the timing on that?
Sure. So that's a part of our 2-month strategy around transparency of the budget and IT investments.
All right. Thank you. And Mr. Kruger, a lot of today's discussion is focused around Government 2.0. This means that agencies will be embracing new technologies to make their jobs easier and hopefully to make citizens, the people that we serve, happier. However, the federal government doesn't always move as fast as the private sector. Sometimes, though, it moves faster. And some of that is purposeful, and that is the government they're not always moving as fast. But we don't want the government to make rash decisions without first thinking things through. So what do you believe, two-part question, what do you believe are the drawbacks of using new technologies in government, and what can we do to address those drawbacks? Delaware is the first state to ratify the Constitution. We call ourselves the first state, so do other people. And our state motto is, it's good to be first. I'm always reminded, though, that there's some things that's probably not good to be first in. Maybe it'd be good to be second or third. But what do you believe are some of the drawbacks of using new technologies in government, and what can we do to address those drawbacks, or what can you do to address them?
Sure. So we definitely want to make sure that the government isn't moving forward with untested, unproven technologies, or technologies, frankly, that will compromise the privacy or security of the American people. Therefore, we need to be deliberative, especially when it comes to privacy and security. That's one of the reasons within the CIO Council we've enhanced the privacy and security subcommittee that's looking at a lot of these issues and that's deliberating around what's going on with a lot of these new technologies. At the same time, what we need to do is we need to recognize that the world has changed in terms of innovation, and the world has changed in terms of leveraging some of these technologies, in that we can put information out there that will allow the American people, the NGOs, and the private sector to actually incubate and create solutions that the government would spend either years or millions of dollars doing.